was very, very happy about this, of course, because Prague Spring Festival has always been kind of an important subject in our house. I grew up in a family of a musician, obviously. Paavo Järvi is my father, conductor, and he has always been very, very much I'm not exaggerating if I say he was sort of in love with Czech music and Czech culture. Since early days when we were kids, we always listened to the supraphone recordings of Czech Philharmonic. So that was a sort of like a dream come true. This is the first time that the orchestra in Estonia has played the complete cycle. And in fact, they have played few famous tone poems before, but not as a complete cycle. So obviously the music is not very familiar to them. And this music is deceptive in its logic and in simplicity, because it sounds so natural, so easy, so somehow naturally flowing, and yet it's quite complex, and one needs to know the little hidden corners of each piece. So it took a little bit of time to really get the orchestra into the sort of familiar mode, but I think we are ready for that now. What I usually do with all my programs is that I try to identify the programs that I would like to do in the one season, and then do them a few times, so I can personally get into it more and have a chance to live with the music a little bit longer. So yes, I mean, I always have a kind of a plan how to program my seasons, so I wouldn't have to do too many new things at once. I know this music by listening to it since I was a kid. But of course, one thing is listening to it as a child, and another thing is to perform it. And especially if you perform it as a cycle, there are other issues that will come into play. For example, how to pace the movements, and what is the timing between the movements. And obviously, to me, the first two and the last two are sort of belonging together naturally, and middle ones need a little bit of separation time. So you start thinking about those issues only when you already have a task at hand to actually perform it and make a logical one whole out of it. But when it comes to the individual pieces, a lot of them are very familiar to me. I think that there are some similarities, perhaps, but the Bohemian, the Czech folk, not only music, but the kind of folkloristic feeling is substantially different from Estonian. We are more Nordic. We have a much more static folk music, for example. The charming thing about Czech music and all, I guess Bohemian music is that it has this rhythmic lift, a spirit that you feel like everything can turn into a dance any moment, and that's obviously the if you listen to the Slavonic dances or anything by Smetana or Dvorak, you have this feeling of rhythmical bounce. So something that the Russians don't have, Germans don't have, Hungarians have in a very different way. It is a very specific thing which, if you kind of enjoy that and if you get into this, that makes everything very, very, very light and somehow charming and dancing. And I always admired that quality in Czech music, and especially Smetana, of course. I wish the strong health and strong financial health to the organization, to this wonderful festival, because it has become and come to symbolize the kind of importance of the not only nationalistic but the cultural importance of Czech Republic and Czech culture, and there's nothing better than doing through music. So festival has been incredibly instrumental throughout all these years, including the Soviet years. It kept its identity and it sort of survived and persevered, and I wish many more years. I want to be alive. It's very hard to know what one would do when one is 70. It's even hard to know what one would want to do, because everything changes and priorities change, and sometimes also the wishes of what one would want to do change. I know that I never thought 10-15 years ago that I would, for example, be doing what I'm doing now on this level. So it is a question of just doing things well and being grateful for each day that you can do them. Challenge for classical music is to be relevant somehow, to be present, because music itself is not in no danger. It is the society and the world around us that is changing, and we need, in order to be present in that ever-changing world, we need to somehow find a way to exist in that new environment, an environment of extremely fast moving technology, extremely volatile and difficult situation when it comes to the geographic and religious and all kind of turmoil that world is facing. We should not accept the argument that somehow classical music somehow is not any more relevant, and somehow pop music now has replaced the music for masses. Even though this seems to be the case, there is something extremely important in keeping the music, classical music, and fighting for it, and being the missionaries, if one can say, for that art form, because it's not only music, it's history. Classical music is just a history written down in the form of music, and one needs to realize that to understand how important it is. Pop music is not in that league, so it is not a coincidence that we still play music from 300 and 400 years ago, and it still touches people's hearts. Meanwhile, there are rock groups that were incredibly famous 20 years ago and nobody knows them now. So there is a value to the human race that this art form presents, and we need to be fighting for it to be present and visible. Contemporary music needs to be defined. What is contemporary music, and what is, what is the role of contemporary music? Because all music was contemporary once. Brahms was new at one point. Mozart's symphony was a new symphony. So writing new music is crucial. Performing and supporting the music of living composers is extremely important. Time is a very strong and fair and quite brutal judge of what survives, what doesn't survive, and usually the time is right. Usually, with some exceptions in the music history, there is a good understanding of why something survives, something doesn't. But if one starts talking about new music, then one should talk about conceptually about all music that is new in the art music scene, not certain trends. Like, for example, there was this Darmstadt direction. There was a kind of serialism, there was a minimalism, there is a spiritualism, whatever. Everything has to have its place, and you know, with the death of some very prominent musical figures recently, everything will change, and the new gurus of new music might actually become minimalist, or might be somebody like Arvo Pärt, and as opposed to somebody like Pierre Boulez, for example. So it all is good, and it's all valid, and it needs to be heard. But one should not decide or be sort of dictated by certain trends of what's important or what's less important, what's more important. Important is that everybody is allowed to express their voice, and it's like everything in the world. It's always the most talented, the most interesting ones survive.